Shut up and sit down.
I am the Angry GM, also known as Scott. I am a 30-year veteran of murdering players from behind a GM screen. And I love to say it that way because it's totally pretentious. Like, I'm a 30-year veteran of running games. I have devoted 30 years of my life to fighting pretend elves in a basement, right? But about 10 years ago, I started a blog on the internet. And I'm the only one still doing a blog, by the way, as I discovered recently, which I'll get to in a minute. I'm the only one still doing a blog. Everybody is doing like video YouTubes and, whatever. But I don't understand you kids with your YouTubes these days. The seminar is going to be filmed, and I'm going to do question and answer at the end. So if you ask your question, your voice might get picked up on camera, or the voice is going to get picked up on camera. Yeah. Yeah, we do those visualization things, It is being filmed by the lovely Tiny GM, my partner in crime, significant other. So I hope that's okay with everyone. And then I'll obviously, like I said, the question and answer will be at the end. But like I said, 10 years ago, I started a blog on the internet I started a blog because I was mad, believe it or not. I had been kicked off a podcast that I had helped create by a former friend who decided to take all of my work, make it his own. And I had never done anything on the internet. This was in the 4th edition era. I'd never done anything in the internet. I was not part of the internet gaming community or anything. I didn't know there was an internet gaming community. I just ran games in my basement. And we started this blog. We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of good numbers right out the bat. And then he kicked me off because we actually got an interview with someone who was a hero of mine. And we had a disagreement about how to handle that. And I got mad. So I'm like, you know what? Fine. I'll start my own podcast. And then I looked into the work that it takes to do a podcast, because you've got to record that and edit it and put it somewhere. And I was not having anything, so I'm like, fine, I'll start a blog. That'll show them. And I started the blog, in which I went out and I bought like a domain, the Angry GM, because that seemed funny. And I put it up there, and then that was it. I'm like, well, now I have my blog. Excellent, done. And then it was like a year and a half later that I had an idea for a way you could modify, I think, 4th edition monsters to make them a little bit more exciting, to make more dynamic combats. And I threw that up there, and one of the guys from, what was that webcomic? The guys who got into trouble with the wolves a few years ago, and that whole, I don't even remember. It doesn't matter. So these guys from a webcomic, they linked it, and then all of a sudden it crashed my site.
Was it Penny Arcade?
Pure luck. What was that?
Was it Penny Arcade?
Penny Arcade, thank you. One of the guys from Penny Arcade accidentally found my stuff and crashed my blog. And that was great. But after that, I actually sort of found my niche, because I started giving out advice where I would break down game mastering in a way that people weren't. Where I would actually sit down and say, okay, when a player says to me, I'm going to try to break down the door, what is actually going on in my head as a game master that helps me figure out what is going on and what to do with the rules to figure that situation out? How do you use your brain? Because this was stuff that was not in any game master's guide or any book that was supposed to teach you how to run a game. It's not in the rules. The rules are just rules. They're literally just, when the situation happens, execute these steps. But how do you get there in your brain? That's what I started to write about, and it turned out there were a lot of people who were looking for exactly that content. At the same time, I started getting a little bit full of myself because people were telling me I was good at a thing, and that's the best way to build an ego, is to have people tell you you're good at something. And so I started looking around at other people's advice and going, this guy. What does that have to do with action adjudication? So I started looking around at other advice, and I discovered that there's a lot of bad advice out there. The internet is a really wonderful tool for people to find out how to do something wrong. Okay, and so about 5 years ago, I decided it was high time I did a seminar. Because you hit a certain point as a blogger, it's like, well, now I'm a big important blogger. I gotta do something, and I'll do a seminar, because that's almost as easy as having a blog. I wrote this thing in 10 minutes. Here's my homework, you know? But, so I did this blog, and I called it the 10 words you couldn't say in gaming. And I had no idea what it was going to be until a week before the convention. And then I decided, you know, it would be great if I went through other people's bad advice and debunked it. And said, okay, this is a bad thing they say, now let me tell you a good thing. And it was a lot of fun for something that I slapped together in 3 days when I realized I had scheduled a seminar and hadn't prepared anything. Which, by the way, is the same way you pretty much GM. It's like, oh, there's a game tomorrow. Monster Manual, flip, 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 flip. Goblins! Okay, it's about goblins. Oh, they're 30th level? Goblin devils. We'll just mix them together. But I decided that it's high time I did a seminar again, which is why I'm here. So 3 days ago, actually it was more like a week ago, I started looking for, you know, some of the old standbys, some of the blogs I used to follow. Let's see, what are those losers saying now? They're all gone. I'm the only one still doing blogs. I'm the only one who thinks people want to read, you know? And I don't have time for video content. So that was the thing. So one of the things I've noticed, though, in the gaming community, and I promise I do have 10 words, and I will get to them in a moment, but one of the things I've noticed in the online gaming community in the last couple of years has been a shift away from people producing content. There is a lot more out there than there ever was of people posting things like, here's a picture of my character I drew. Or, here, it's a lot of artwork, actually. It's like, if you go searching for D&D advice, you will get, here's a picture of my character. Or, I built this terrain. Or, like, I can't even think, because I'm stuck on just the art. I was scrolling through art for days and days. It's like, no, I just want to know what you're saying to do wrong and how to GM wrong. And it's all buried out there in stuff that's orbiting around cosplay. That's another one. No offense to any cosplayers. But the gaming community has become inundated with cosplay in the way of content. Now, please keep cosplaying, because all of that is actually good for the game. Everything that orbits the game is good for the game, but if you are me and you have 3 days to prepare a seminar you haven't thought about in 3 months, and you need some bad gaming advice, the cosplayers are in your way. That's the takeaway here. But I do think that one of the most important things, one of the most important messages for me to get out there now, apart from what I did yesterday, was I sat here and told people, go out and run games, even though you're going to be bad at it, you're going to hate it, and you're going to be terrible, and it's going to make you depressed. Go out and do it, because the gaming community needs more gamers. If you are an idea person, create content. Create an adventure and put it out there. Create new monsters and put it out there. Create all this stuff and get it out there. People need to hear it. And if you have an idea for how to run a game better, get out there and tell people, because we're losing that. And the community, the gaming community relies on a community. It's a social game, we need that. So if you have something to get out there, get it out there, and maybe someday your bad advice will inspire me 3 days before a seminar to make fun of you at a convention somewhere. So there is my motivational speech. Now let's get to the 10 words you cannot say in gaming. Now with each of these, I have found some bad advice after extensive searching for almost 8 hours straight. So it's a lot of work. And I have found some bad advice, and I have distilled down the word that you, if you want to be a good game master, need to remove from your vocabulary. Not because it is a bad word, not because it's a problem or anything else. It's just a word that will lead you in a bad direction if you believe it is important. So the first word that will get you to a terrible place if you think it's important is the word fun. This word has no place in a good game master's vocabulary, okay? The problem with the word fun is that it tells you nothing. Someone will say to you, make your game fun. Or, remember, if your game was fun, you did a good job. Okay? Now the problem with make your game fun is it doesn't tell you how to do that. How the heck do you make a game fun? There's not like, you look through the monster manual, there's no list of, okay, here's the fun monsters and these are the bland ones. Oh, I should use the fun ones. There's no instructions that will tell you how to build a fun encounter. And I'm going to come back to this with another word. I just want to mention that the word fun is not your benchmark for success. Okay? The word fun will not get you anywhere. And if you firmly believe that, well, as long as my players are having fun, I did a good job, then you know what you're going to do? You're going to stop trying to do a better job. Okay? And that is important. GMing is a skill. And like any skill, you need to practice it. You need to look at what you're doing, recognize what you're doing wrong, and do it better next time. It is a constant thing of self-improvement. Now, there are some GMs out there who are just casual. They just want to show up on the weekends, you know, here, kill the goblins or the goblin devils, depending on the level. And that's it. Here's some treasure. Let's go back and do it again. I'm not discounting that kind of gameplay. But I'm also guessing that anybody who is sitting here in this room or anybody who has been reading my blog doesn't want to stop there. They want to run the best damn games they can run, or the least worst games they can run, depending on, you know, personal potential. Because there's a part of that, you know? If you stop at, well, the players had fun, I did my job, you'll never get better, okay? There is one specific piece of advice I found from an unnamed blogger, however, that I want to call out specifically as terrible advice. And I'm not going to name any names here. So if it's your blog, I'm sorry. Don't, by the way, if I mention you, don't jump up and be like, hey, that was mine. It's not going to go good for you, I promise. Make failure fun, or make failure more fun than success. I saw this on 3 separate websites. Okay, now there is this belief that if you fail at something, it can't possibly be, or if you succeed at something, it can't possibly be interesting or fun or whatever. When we watch movies, we don't watch to see the heroes succeed, we watch them to fail repeatedly and have a story until the moment they succeed. And that's all well and good, but a role-playing game is not a movie. And the protagonists in the movie are not, you know, it's not like the actor is invested in that character to be like, I really hope that things work out good for Han Solo this time, otherwise I can't do this again. You know, Harrison Ford never said that. But your players are there not just to experience a story or a movie, but to also play a game, and they want to win. Okay? There is this belief that failure is seen as bad, and you need to, as a GM, counter that and make failure the interesting thing. Well, no. Failure needs to feel like failure. Because if you feel like if something fails and you feel like you earned that, you say, I could do better next time. If I had just done this attack instead, if I had used this ability, if I had solved this puzzle better, if I had seen this clue, everything would be fine. I failed, I'm going to try harder next time, and you get more invested in becoming better at the game and playing your character better. And that's a part of the game. On top of that, the idea that you as a GM should preferentially make some part of your game the fun part means that there are other parts that you are necessarily saying, yeah, that's just success. We don't have to make that fun. So what are you going to do when they succeed? Make it boring? You know, I mean, that's the logic like behind Ubisoft using all the loot boxes. It's like, well, if we make the game boring enough, they'll pay to make it fun. So you could charge your players every time they roll a failure on a die, but I don't recommend that, because eventually the UK government will sue you. Long story short, get fun out of your vocabulary. It doesn't give you good advice, it tells you to prefer certain parts of your game, and it keeps you from self-improvement. Next word is on the floor. Next word, immersion. Hear this one a lot, okay? This one is a justification word. This is a word that people use to win fights on the internet, immersion. I let my players invent their own NPCs. I ask them to invent their own cities. I ask them to help me with the world building. I make them keep track of initiative for me. These are all pieces of advice, by the way, I found. Again, unnamed people. If it's you, be quiet. all people saying they make their players do this, that, and the other thing. And the reason is always, and it makes them more immersed. Ooh, immersed. What does immersion mean? In theory, it means that you are so focused on the game that everything fades to insignificance and you forget you're playing a game. At least that's what people think. Well, guess what? That actually doesn't happen. Nobody ever forgets they're playing a game. Okay, because at some point you're going to say something like, okay, roll an acrobatics check. Now it's a game. You can't make people forget that it's a game. There's no way. They know they're sitting at a table. Immersion is not going to get you there, and immersion lets you justify things that don't actually improve your game as much as you think they do. And I will talk about the reasons to invite players to do things, but immersion is not the reason. Immersion is your excuse to not think of a reason. Okay? What you are looking for in a game, and the word that you should have in your vocabulary instead, is engagement. Emotional engagement. This is that players actually care about the outcome. They care about the world, they care about the characters. They don't want to see that NPC die. They care that they have to go back to town and tell a group of villagers that the kids died. Okay, which has actually happened in 3 separate games of mine in the last 2 years. I had people get kids killed and had to go break the news to their family. Which, by the way, not fun. Okay, but immersive. And I'm not recommending you do that, by the way. That's something that you have to have the right group for. They have to take that. You know. Also, it doesn't make failure fun. It's like, congratulations, you got these children murdered, go admit it now. And I'm going to role play the hell out of those parents, by the way. Good luck. Everybody will be crying by the end. But no, okay. Emotional engagement. That the people care about the outcome and that they care about their own actions. And to be fair, as long as their actions actually produce consequences in the game, most players are already engaged. They already care what they're doing. Because if they don't, they'll fail, and failure is not fun. And of course, they'll die, and that's not fun too, because every time you die, it means paperwork and math. You know. So worry less about immersion, worry more about engagement, and don't use immersion as a justification for inviting players to create. That said, if you have players who want to create, they will signal it to you, okay? Because they will give you a 4-page backstory they expect you to read. And we'll get to that too, okay? That is, in fact, let's jump ahead to that one. Backstory. This is a favorite on the internet. I found like 7 or 8 different articles on how to write the perfect backstory. I also found a tweet from a person who actually works at a fairly high level at a fairly prominent game company, specifically say, make sure you write a tragic backstory for your character, because the only thing that could possibly produce an adventurer is tragedy. I don't have a punchline there. Okay, this is it. This is the only thing that can produce an adventurer is tragedy. No adventure ever came out of just like, you know what, I don't want to be a farmer. You know, my grandfather had this sword. He probably had cool stories to tell. And, you know, my parents just want me to be a farmer. I don't want to be chained to a plow all my life. Yoink, I'll go and find me the goblin cave. Right? Perfectly good story. But here is the problem with the backstory, okay? Every author will tell you that backstory is the part of the story that is too boring to be in the story. You start writing a story, right? This is the first thing you do. You outline the story from the beginning, and then as an author, you look for the part where the story actually turns interesting. It's like, oh, here, where the evil empire attacks the town, right? And then you just back it off a little skosh, so that you have the normal day right before that happens. Like, you know, Bob woke up and he was on the farm and everything was going fine, and then empire. Okay? Backstory is boring. Nobody wants to read it. The other thing is that backstory is a straitjacket. Here is the truth. Human drama is about human interaction, and role-playing games are drama. We are playing out interactions between characters making choices and exploring the consequences. Interaction defines a character. When we watch a character in a movie, we don't want a text crawl that introduces the character. Like, character walks up on screen and then their name flashes and then fade to black, and there's the whole thing where, Bob was born on a farm, and, he heard stories from his grandfather and whatever, and then he went after the goblin devils one day, because he was high level. We don't want that. That's exposition, it's boring. And we don't want Bob to just, like he walks into an inn and you're like, what's your story? And it's like, well, I was born on a farm. We don't want that either. What we want is that scene where there's a wild horse that is crazy and it's going through town, and it's dragging a cart behind it because the farmer who was driving it, he got killed by a goblin. Now the horse is tear-assing through the market, trampling people, overturning goods, and then Bob runs on and he's like, I got this, and he runs forward, and he's like, come on, calm down. He runs alongside the horse, jumps on it, and he's like, okay, calm down, everything's good. And then the other hero, she's like, oh, Bob, that was amazing. How did you know how to do that? And he's like, well, I grew up on a farm. I've been around horses all my life. And so I knew how to calm the horse down. And that's the moment where Bob realizes that his humble beginnings did equip him to start becoming a hero. It's nice to have those backstory moments to fall back, like I grew up on a farm, this is why I know this stuff. But also, if you have too much of that, it prevents you from suddenly discovering something about your character. Like if you're just playing Bob the Fighter, and you're 2 sessions in, and you have that ride skill on your character because you got it for free. It's like part of your background. It's like, here's your ride skill. And then you have that scene, and then someone puts you on the spot and says, Bob, how did you know how to do that? Well, I have the skill on my character sheet. I got it for free. Because on page 78, no, you would say something like, well, I grew up on a farm. I've been around animals all my life. I love animals. It makes you free to discover your character and makes it interesting for the other players to discover your character with you. When you write down too much backstory, you are also disinclined to bring those backstory discoveries out to the game. You already wrote them down, you don't need to. And the GM read them, that's all that matters. If you're discovering your character as you play, you're dragging the other players at the table along for the ride, and they want to be in that ride. Because that's a far more interesting scene than you just spouting out your backstory at the beginning of the adventure. GMs also get sucked into the backstory problem. Okay? Your dungeon has 17 pages of history because your dungeon was built by the ancient magi 10,000 years ago when they harnessed the ancient elemental magic that was buried in the ground. And then it was taken over by the devil goblins. Because I am milking that joke for all it's worth. Okay. And then the devil goblins were driven out by the knights of the Holy Sword Cross. And then, and you write all this stuff out, and you think it helps you bring character to the dungeon. It really doesn't. Because in the end, it's still just, and now you're in a room. You kick open the door, it's a big chamber with a vaulted ceiling, cobwebs in the ceiling, and inside there's whatever. I throw details into my dungeon all the time. I'm not saying don't do that. You will find the corpse or the skull of a goblin with twisted horns, like a tiefling goblin. That's actually kind of cool. I actually think I'm going to run with this devil goblin. There are tiefling goblins, right? They're goblins that have been corrupted. But I'll throw those details in, but I don't necessarily say, well, how did this come to be? And if you don't do that, number one, then the players will fixate on things they're interested in. It's like, wait, did you say goblin with devil horns? What's about that? Can I do a history check? Yeah, ancient, I gotta go to the bathroom. Okay, anyway, now let me give you the results. It was an ancient cult of devil goblins. Why don't you take your notebook at the bath? Toilet paper, you're out of toilet paper. Don't ask, shut up. But, that you putting yourself on the spot as a GM, by the way, is a great way to improve your own skills. And it forces you to do a word that you need to remove from your vocabulary. Improvisation. This is something that they worship online. Improvisation. Because remember, anything that isn't improvised is railroading. If you know the answer to the mystery before you have started the game, people will tell you are railroading. Because the players can't suddenly say, you know what, I think the butler did it. And then you say, oh, you're absolutely right, it was the butler. Brilliant deduction. That, by the way, is not a deduction and they didn't solve a story. And once the players realize that everything they say is always correct, all of the magic you're getting out in your game goes away. Because now they're not solving puzzles and answering problems, they're just writing a story and they realize you're not doing anything. Okay? But improvisation is something they love to talk about online. And they will tell you to take improv classes, it'll improve your GMing. They'll tell you to use improvisational skills, and then they'll tell you two things that absolutely are the worst things, but I'll come to those in a second. Improv classes will not improve your skills as a GM after the first day. Okay, because improv classes cannot teach you one thing that is the one thing you actually need as a GM. The ability to pull a detail out of your hindquarters and run with it. Okay, that is something that only comes with practice. You put that random thing in your game, and then one of the players says, why did you do that random thing? Or you misspeak. My players think I'm brilliant for coming up with weird details in the game. And really what I do is I misspeak a lot. I'm a pretty clumsy speaker. Or I just like to start rambling off and doing prose, and then all of a sudden I'll realize I said a word in there. It's like, I didn't mean to say the goblin and devil horns. I don't know what that means. And they're like, what does that mean? That's got to be a big mystery. It's like, yeah, hold on a second, guys. AFK, pee break. So anyway, you were right. It is a big mystery. You know, I'm running out of line now, so that's good. The point is, I do throw those details in, and I misspeak, and I run with all of that, because it gives me practice to have to come up with stuff on the spot. That's improvisation that is useful for a GM. The rest of an improv class is actually a lot of stuff about how to properly structure a scene. And the thing with that is that it will lead you to some bad places. It leads you to the words always and never. Always say yes. Never say no. Okay? These are things that they do teach you in improv classes. Okay? But they mean it in a specific way. So it's like if your player says, hey, can I jump off the cliff and flap my arms and fly away? No. Why would you think that's a thing? You can say no. In fact, sometimes if you don't say no to something ridiculous, you have broken your game world. And see yesterday's seminar about consistency. Consistency is very important because it helps your game world be a real world. As soon as you break the consistency, people start to fall apart. It's like, I can't accept this world as a real world anymore because yesterday, Bob the fighter, the farmer fighter, jumped off a cliff and flew away. And you let that happen. Now, obviously, then they'll say, well, I don't mean that. I just mean when the players propose something cool, make it a part of the world and just say yes. And so where does that end? Yeah, I know that's a slippery slope argument. I don't like to make slippery slope arguments because the more you make slippery slope arguments, the more you'll make and it becomes a slippery slope. But the fact is, slippery slope arguments are sometimes valid. As a GM, everything you do is ammunition to your players. They are deciding their next course of action based on everything you've taught them about how the world works. So if you tell them that the world acts at random, they will start acting randomly. And if you tell them anything you say has a chance of working, they will just start doing anything. And you don't want that. Always say yes in improv, by the way, means specifically that at the start of an improvisational scene, because it's usually, without going into too much detail, just think of a scene in two halves. The first half of the scene is the setup of the scene. So you have two people who are playing out a scene. You say, okay, it is a pet store, and you are a couple, and you are buying chinchilla. Okay? And then then one of the people, like I'm the guy in the couple, and you know what, I'm allergic to chinchillas, and I just decide that in the middle of the scene. It's like, I don't want to buy a chinchilla, honey. I am so deathly allergic to chinchillas. Hair, scales. Chinchillas, snakes, or reptiles? Snakes or reptiles? Snakes or rodents? I don't remember. Rodents, thank you. Okay, so I'm allergic to chinchilla scales. Because that's what I've decided in the scene. And so now, when we walk up to the other guy, we have to say, do you have any scaleless chinchilla? right? And now the guy playing the pet store owner, if he says, you know what you're talking about, chinchillas are rodents, not reptiles, that's ridiculous, get out of my store. Scene is over. The audience will not eat that up, okay? That guy has to run with it somehow, and he has to decide, okay, this guy doesn't know anything about chinchillas. I can launch into this silly, long-winded explanation of chinchillas, you know, or, and I'm not just talking about improv for comedy, I'm talking improv in general. Or, you know, he runs with it and says, yes, we have a new breed of scaleless chinchillas that were developed by this lab. And then the woman playing the female in the couple, she says something like, oh, I don't want to do anything that was developed by animal testing. She decided that about her character, right? So people are making decisions and adding details to the scene to set up a dramatic interaction, a conflict. And that's what they mean in improv when they say, always say yes, don't say no. It means when someone brings a detail into the scene, you run with it. Or you have to bring it into the scene somehow. But good improvisational actors and comedians also know that you can only get away with that in the beginning of the scene. That there comes a certain point where you have to stop throwing things into the scene and now having the conflict and moving the scene toward a conclusion, or else you have the scene that never ends and people leave. Okay? And that's something that all the improvisational worshipers on the internet who tell you, go take an improv class, it'll make you the best GM ever, never say no, always say yes, they forget that part. It's like everybody in that scene has to have a sense of, okay, we have enough in the scene now to play with, now we have to play. Because the audience isn't there to watch you throw out ridiculous ideas. They are there to see how those ridiculous ideas interplay and conflict and, you know, feed off of each other to a conclusion. Which, if it's a comedy scene, maybe some sort of a punchline, or maybe the denial of a punchline, which can also be hilarious. Or if it's a dramatic scene, emotional conflict resolution, something like that. But if you stop on the first day of an improv class, you get as far as, I'll never say no to anything, and then you will run scenes that never end in your game. So just take improvisation out of your vocabulary. The other reason to remove improv from your vocabulary, by the way, is because people think improvisation means running without a plan. Sitting down without a plan and just doing whatever. Improvisation actually means planning and doing at the same time, which is another thing improvisational actors know, because they know the structure of a scene. They know that a scene has to have a setup, rising action, conflict, falling action, denouement. Or, well, I guess falling action is denouement. Whatever. Anyway, you know what I'm saying though. Improvisational actors understand the setting of a scene, and so they have to do it while they're executing the scene. That's, okay, you know what, I'm feeling it now, it is time for the climax. Where the guy suddenly explodes. It's like, you're always going on about this GMO stuff, and I just want to eat a damn steak, and I don't even want to be married to you anymore. Climax, something like that, you know? And then resolution. I really don't have an exit strategy for that scene that I just improvised, but that's it. I have two other partners in the scene, so they can work it out from there. But that's the point, is you have to understand the structure, and you have to plan and do in one step. Okay. Let's see, what else do I have here? Ooh, how am I for time? Let's talk briefly about cool, because this is like fun. Okay, this is follow the rule of cool, by the way. Okay, and you'll see this a lot online. Follow the rule of cool. If your players suggest something bombastic and amazing that will make them look good, always say yes. Also, you'll see, be a fan of the PCs, which is another way of saying fawn over the players. Whatever they want to do, you gotta love them for it. And I don't know if you've ever run a game, it is sometimes very hard to love your players for the things they do. Okay? Then there's also the don't say no in here too, which is why I jumped to cool. Okay? Cool is another word like fun. It doesn't really tell you how to do anything. What's cool, what's not cool, it's over the top, yada, yada, yada. But cool has another more insidious power, and that is the destruction of tone. Okay, so, Lord of the Rings. awesome series of movies, readable series of books. I'm sorry, unpopular opinion. I found the movies to be more emotionally invested than the books. The books were very dry prose. Can't fault it, that was how he wrote, and that was the time period, but whatever. So I'm talking about the movies here. The movies have a lot of really emotional scenes that stick with you. Samwise running out to the boat when Frodo is, he's leaving the Fellowship, and Samwise can't swim, and he's willing to drown just to stay with Frodo. The moment that always gets me is when Frodo wakes up in Riverdale after Arwen or Arwen? I always get those two confused. Arwen brings him there after he's been stabbed by the Nazgul, and then he wakes up and Gandalf is there looking down at him, and Frodo says, "What happened to you?" And Gandalf's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Frodo. I was delayed." And in that moment where Gandalf gets that, or Ian McKellen actually, I should say, he gets that look in his face and says, "I'm sorry, I was delayed," you can feel the whole weight of Sauron's betrayal of him and everything it means to him and everything he's not saying in that one scene. That is a great emotional scene. And there's a lot of scenes of emotional heroism, of people doing the things they have to do even though it's killing them. It's fantastic. And there is also a scene where Legolas throws a shield on the ground, surfs down it, and rapid fires an arrow into 1,000 orcs. And then later on there is a scene where Indiana Jones swings to the top of an elephant and murders an army and an elephant with, I think, one arrow, and keeps score. Okay? That is tone. The tone of 90% of those movies is a very epic adventure with some light moments, and the light moments aren't comedy, they're charm. They're the moments of seeing the hobbits together and seeing their friendship, and we feel good that they're friends, and we feel happy and we feel bad of all the things they're going for. And then there's a couple of really ridiculous, over-the-top moments that when you're watching them, you're like, what? Oh, we're doing this now? This stuff wouldn't even pass in the Matrix, right? And then, do I need, the big problem, the Hobbit movies did not do so well. And I have two words for you, rabbit's leg. Radagast the Brown, he should have been teaching at Hogwarts. That's where he belonged. He did not belong in the Lord of the Rings universe, and that's all down to tone. As a GM, you know there is a tone at your table, and you set that tone. It can be serious, it can be fun, it can be over the top and bombastic. And it's going to vary a little. You can't just run a depressing game. It has to have light moments. I often forget this, admittedly. Okay, my players may need therapy. I admit that. It just keeps getting worse. But you have to police your tone. And if the rule is whatever they do is okay, and you're just trying to make them look cool, you're going to produce a Marvel movie. And not one of the good ones. It's going to be, what was it, The Dark World? Or no. Yeah, it was The Dark World.
Yeah, it was the one too.
Holy cow, was that movie terrible. And honestly, Age of Ultron also. Anyway, unpopular opinions, that's what I'm filled with. That's why I'm so angry. The point is, though, if you follow the rule of cool, you are beating the tone to death. And then the players cannot remain emotionally invested because at any given moment they don't know how to feel. And you can't go through emotional whiplash. Emotional whiplash gets you to the end of Star Wars The Phantom Menace, where you're going from, oh my god, the Gungans are, Misa gonna fight the droids, oh I tripped and I killed 70 droids, to, oh my god, Qui-Gon is dead, and Obi-Wan is mourning him, and then in that moment slays Darth Maul. You can't go from one to the other for the same reason you can't go from first to third in your car without the transmission falling out of under the hood. Okay? People's emotions can't take it. So you have to maintain the tone. And that is why the rule of cool will run you bad. And I'm just looking at the clock here, and let's see, what else do we have? Okay. Story. Story's a good one. We already kind of talked about this one. Just focus on the story. Don't worry about the rules. Now you already know why that's wrong, because I've kind of covered that. Number one, if you focus on the story and don't care about the rules, well, you're not making a consistent world. Nobody knows how it works. They'll start behaving at random. Number two, though, is that just like an improvisational actor, stories have a structure. They start with an inciting incident, and then they have some rising action. The players fail, they succeed, they fail, they succeed. Things go good, things go bad. Tension wavers, tone wavers, climax, resolution. Okay, stories have a structure to them. But the thing about a story is that it is a holistic and emergent property, and speaking of pretentious terms, right? Holistic, it is the whole thing. Okay? The story of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, is the movie Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Often people will complain story for something else. Like, oh yeah, well, so what's the story of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope? Well, there's Luke Skywalker, and he's born on a farm planet. He's heard stories from his grandfather or father and wants to get off there and go fight the devil goblins. No, I'm sorry, that's plot, but nice try. Well, it's about Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, and Luke Skywalker, he has to accept his fate and, become one with the Force and do all of that. Oh, I'm sorry, what you're describing there, sir, is character. That's a character arc. Too bad. And on it goes. A story is made up of a lot of different elements, but the whole thing we experience is a story. That's holistic. As a GM, you control certain elements of that. You create the setting. You can drive character arcs. You can drive plots. But you can't make a story, because the story is a whole bunch of ingredients together. You cannot just make a cake. A cake is a bunch of ingredients mixed together. You have to know how those ingredients go together to make a good one. So talking about story as if it's a thing doesn't really help you. You have to understand the levers you can pull to make a good story. The other thing is that story is emergent. Okay? Stories have a structure, and people expect that structure in their brains. Some movies feel slow, precisely because the movie does not deliver certain expected elements of a movie at the times when the movie is supposed to. The first Avengers movie, great movie overall, one criticism, it dragged in the beginning, right? It was kind of slow. It took a little while to get going. It felt like it was going a little bit slow, right? A lot of people said that. And that is because there is a scene in the movie called a tent pole scene. It is the scene in the movie where the story becomes personal for the characters, or the main character, and the character can no longer back out of the story. They are now fully committed. It comes at 1 hour in. 60 minutes. Set your watch by it. Watch any movie, you'll see it. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Okay, that is the scene where Indy unearths the Ark. At exactly 60 minutes in on the DVD, Indy is standing there, he's looking out over the desert, the sun is setting, and then someone says, Indy, we found it. And then they cut to where they found the Well of Lost Souls, and the Ark is in there. At that moment, Indiana Jones is now personally responsible for the Ark. The Nazis were never going to find it. They were digging in the wrong spot. He dug it up. He's now responsible for everything that happens. He can't back out. His character couldn't do it and be his character. Okay? Muppet Christmas Carol. 60 minutes in. You know what happens 60 minutes in? But Spirit, whose grave is this? No! Tell me, these things can be changed. If I just do the right things, they can be changed. That's the moment where the story became personal for Scrooge. And notice it has nothing to do, by the way, with the climax, the resolution, or anything else. It is actually just that moment where it's the character's personal story and they can't get out. Until that moment where Ebenezer thought he was maybe being led through the future of some other terrible person to teach him a lesson, he could go back to who he was. But at that point where it's like, Tiny Tim is dead and you are going to die unloved and friendless, and it's you, that's when he couldn't go back. Die Hard, 60 minutes into the second. Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon. This is the edited for TV version. That's the first moment he talks to Hans Gruber on the phone, and where he and Hans Gruber now have their exchange, and he's identified himself as the villain, and he knows who the villain is. At that point, it's personal. 65 minutes into Avengers, 65 minutes in, is the scene where Loki is imprisoned on the stupid helicarrier thing, and giving that whole speech where they all basically realize that Loki's whole plan has been to get captured, get them fighting each other, get the Hulk to rip the helicarrier out of the sky and destroy the Avengers before they can fight him. That's the moment where it's personal. That's the moment where Loki says, I was coming for you guys. And I was going to use the Hulk to do it. At that point, it's the Avengers' personal story. Yeah, later on comes the part where, Coulson died and he had the baseball cards in his pocket or whatever it was. He died for you, go do it. But that was just, them refusing the call a little bit. It was already personal the moment Loki was coming for them. And it happened 65 minutes in. You may not know that's a fact about filmmaking. Documented fact. But your brain knows it's taking a little while to get. At this point, the characters aren't really totally invested. What's going on? Okay? That's the importance of understanding the elements of story. But if you just talk about, tell a story, tell whatever, you're not going to get that. More importantly, though, you don't notice that until after the movie's over. It's after you walk out of the movie that you're like, I really love that movie. That was great. But it could have gone a little faster. Could have picked up the pace. Because story is an emergent property. It's something that you evaluate after the fact, after the game session, after the adventure, after the campaign. If you find yourself worrying a lot about story, you're trying to deal with something that hasn't finished yet. Okay? So cut story out of your vocabulary. Talk about characters, talk about tone, talk about structure, narrative, tension, plot, all of those things. But don't talk about story, it won't get you anywhere. I'm going to do these last three real quick because they are kind of not that big in terms of the other things. Broken! This is a big one for the mechanics bloggers. The ones who like to talk about game mechanics. This thing is broken, that thing is broken, this thing is overpowered, we gotta get rid of this thing. This thing, it's gonna break your game. Broken is a very specific word, okay? It is a word that means that the game designers set out to do a specific thing in the game and have failed to deliver it either because the thing they designed does not do what it was supposed to do, or the thing that it was designed crashes into other things in an unexpected way. That is the definition of broken, okay? If you use the word broken, you are saying, I am so keyed into this game and its designers that I know exactly what they were trying to do and exactly why they were trying to do it, and I have evaluated the entire game even though they did also, and I have found the thing they missed and where they went wrong. Okay? That's a lot to think of yourself. That's the sort of thing I write. Okay? And I'm not recommending you go that route. Okay? The other problem with broken, though, and this is the reason why you want to remove it from your vocabulary, is because broken is a way that people take their personal opinions and try to lend them some semblance of objectivity. I don't like a certain feat in D&D because I have a player who drives me crazy with it. It is the polearm master feat. Okay? That feat drives me bonkers. I don't like it. I hate it. I hate trying to get around it. I hate every time I try to move a monster up to the party, he's right there, killing the monster before it gets anywhere near them. I hate that. Is it broken? No, he's doing exactly what he's supposed to do. Or, alternatively, I don't know if it's broken. I wasn't in the room when they made that. Maybe that's what they wanted to happen. But I do know I don't like it. But if I just go online and say, I don't like the polearm master feat because my players make me cry when they use it, that doesn't feel like I'm saying anything meaningful. But if I could say it's broken, if it's objectively, axiomatically wrong and bad, and anyone who uses it should feel wrong and bad, I can win arguments on the internet. And I have now made an objective, factual statement. And we all love objective, factual statements because then we can be right or wrong. If we're just voicing opinions, well, who cares? It's just an opinion, and everybody has one. And they all stink, right? The old phrase. Here's the problem. This is a game about pretend elves that we play in our basements. Okay? There's nothing objective about it. It is purely for entertainment. Like, purely. The only reason we do it is for fun. The word you're not allowed to say. So don't say that word. But that's the only reason we do it. What is the problem of having a subjective opinion about something that's supposed to be fun? I don't like this thing. It isn't fun for me. Well, you're wrong. What do you mean I'm wrong? I'm wrong that I don't like it? I'm wrong that it isn't fun for me? What could that possibly mean? I know what's fun. Broken is a word you use to argue. It is a word you use to prove an opinion. What you really need to do is be comfortable having opinions so that you can say, I just don't like that thing. It annoys me when he does it. It makes me sad because my monsters keep dying. And I want my monsters to win. I like them. I created them. Have opinions. Enjoy your game. Like it, don't like it. And just be honest about that. I love this. I don't love this. I hate it. I don't hate it. Whatever. Problem player. This is the equivalent of broken for a human being. I have someone at my table who is a problem player. Okay? This was started years and years and years ago by Robin Laws. Robin Laws wrote a book. I think it was The Munchkin's Guide to Power Gaming. Robin Laws of Game Mastering. This is where it first appeared. Robin Laws, game designer, writes this book, Robin's Laws of Game Mastering. And in there, he defines player types. He says you can break down your players by different types. You have the character actor, you have the power gamer, you have the rules lawyer, yada, yada, yada. So that you can now classify your players and know how to deal with them. Which, everybody thought that was brilliant. I look at that and I say, that sounds awful combative, doesn't it? But now I'm equipped to deal with my players. That's okay, I can deal with you. You're a rules lawyer, I know how to handle you. Give me that rule book. Now remember your citations. That's not the way to do it. Here is the thing. Everybody plays games for different reasons. Okay? Everybody comes to the table with their own definition of what they will enjoy or not enjoy, what will make them happy and what won't. Some people like to kill monsters, some people like to get immersed in their characters, some people like to create the world with you. That's all fine. And you have your own reasons for wanting to run a game. You want to tell a story, or you want to create a world, or you want to torture a group of people week after week with psychological trauma to see how much they can take in some sort of sick social experiment. Because we haven't built the vaults yet, and I can't become a vault overseer, so it's all I've got, right? Now, sometimes these things are going to clash. Sometimes I want to build an immersive, detailed world, and I want my characters to go through it and discover all the details and think I'm brilliant for tying it all together. And they want to kill some green things and take their stuff. And that doesn't quite match up. Then we have a conflict, and we have to resolve it. Sometimes the resolution is, you want a different game, I want a different game, I'll go run that game, you go play that game, and everybody can be happy. Okay? But the idea that there is some set of specific reasons to play a game that is problematic in some way is terrible GMing. And you most often see this online with power gamers. Power gamers are problem players. They will break your game. And see, it's called a callback, right? It's like that Devil Goblin thing, okay? It's bad GMing because it leads you to think there is only one way you play the game, and that's yours. And you've got 5 people at the table, just like you demand your players compromise with each other so that everybody can have fun, you also need to compromise with them. And there is always a point where a group of people can't reach a compromise, where the only topping I will have on pizza is pineapple and nobody else will eat pineapple. We either have to order 2 pizzas or go to separate restaurants. Those are deal breakers. It's okay to have them, and you have to be able to discuss them. But for the most part, the minute you start using the word power gamer, you are going to start having conflicts with your, problem player. Maybe I did say that, I don't know. We'll run it back after. We'll do an instant replay. The minute you start saying problem player, you have now lost your ability to compromise with people and to understand why they're playing your game. Drop it from your vocabulary. And finally, with the last 5 minutes, and I hope there's no Q&A, because I ran a little long. This is something that actually came up recently in a live chat I was doing online, but it's also something that there's a lot of advice you're going to find. It's the word inspiration. This word is a myth. It's a complete myth. It is something that people think needs to exist before you can be creative. Okay? People who are not creative for a living, by the way, believe in inspiration. Once you start being creative for a living, and this is a personal learning experience for me, because years ago I was an accountant, and you're not allowed to be creative as an accountant. They put you in jail for that. It turns out. Anyway, I don't want to talk about that. Now I am a blogger, I am an author, I'm an independent game designer, I'm published. I have one credit, I'm published, that's it, professional. I have been paid to design a game once. I additional designed a game. I additional designed the hell out of that. Nothing I designed actually ended up in the book. I think one sidebar did. But my name is in the book, so I'm a professional now. But here's the thing, right? If you're not creative for a living, you think, I'm gonna get inspired, I'm gonna have an idea, I'm gonna bang it out, and it's gonna be brilliant. If you're a professional, you think, shit, this is, sorry for my language, darn, this is due tomorrow. I have to write an article, or I'm not gonna get paid. I'll just start writing and see what happens. Happens more often than you think. Okay? Journalists have to do it. They have to get a story out, right? They may not know what to write about until the day they're writing that story. You know? The minute you are being creative for a living, you learn that you don't get to sit around and wait for inspiration. And that's when you also learn that inspiration is not a thing that is actually floating out there in the ether that you're just gonna snatch up. It's, a brilliant mechanic for crafting magical items. All I need to do is sculpt it into an elegant tapestry. It doesn't work that way. You just have to force yourself to do it. And it's really, really hard. Okay? It is really, really hard when you have that game 2 nights and you have a blank piece of paper and the minutes are ticking away. And unfortunately, because this is just a game about pretend elves that we do in our basement, it's really easy to say, hey guys, I can't run the game tonight. I just didn't have time and I didn't have inspiration. I'm sorry. And it's really, really easy because now you don't even do that. You just do, game canceled, can't run tonight. Which means you don't have to look the people you're failing in the eye. Because as a game master, no matter what you might claim about how you're doing it for fun or whatever, you're doing it for friends. Even if you're doing it for strangers, you're doing it for people who you would like to be friends someday. And that means you have made a commitment to do something good for people. A fun game, a social experience, whatever it is. You've made that experience and now you have to look them in the eye and say, I have failed you. You get no fun tonight because I don't have inspiration. And maybe it would be a little bit easier if you had a video chat every time that you had to tell your players you would cancel. And honestly, I wish it's something that I did more, because I've been going through some personal struggles myself. And I've canceled a lot of my own games recently. And I've become aware that there are people I have promised a good game, because these are people who tell me after the game, I had a lot of fun. That villain, I got one of the best compliments I've ever gotten. And it was, that villain that you put in that last game was the best villain I have ever seen in a game. And I wanted to kill her, and I loved her, and I want her in the story, so I don't want to kill her. It was, you know, I created such a level of cognitive dissonance in my character in my player that I destroyed morality. It's like, that person's evil, and I want them to live because I want to see what they do next. And it's like Ollivander, it's like, he did terrible things, great things. Oh wait, he did great things. Terrible, yes, but great. Because Ollivander was, in his heart, he was a scientist, right? He loved wand lore, you know. So he wanted to see what Voldemort could do with that wand. And he didn't want to admit it, but he really wanted to know, you know. But anyway, the point is, we make a commitment to these people every time we show up. And if we sit around waiting for inspiration, we fail in that commitment. And it's important to learn there's no such thing as inspiration. As you keep doing it, as you sit down and force yourself to create, even when you've got nothing, it becomes easier. Okay? It's sort of like a hose that gets pinched off. The more you run water through that hose, this is not how hoses work, but you know, it's been years since I had to do fluid dynamics, so this is not how hoses work, but it's like a hose that gets pinched off. The more you run water through it, the more the water will flow. But if you let yourself off the hook and convince yourself, I'm waiting for inspiration, I'm waiting for motivation, It's never going to happen. The more you don't do something, the easier it is to not do it. And the easier it is to tell yourself, it's okay that I didn't do it. It's just a game about pretend elves in your basement. But for me, it has also become, I'm disappointing people who I genuinely care about. And so, if there's one thing you take away from this, it's get rid of the word inspiration. Okay? Sit down and do, and eventually what you think is inspiration will come. And that is my seminar. Does anyone have questions in 5 seconds? Anything? No, seriously, if anyone's got a question, I'll try to answer it. Oh, good. That means I covered everything. Or you all checked out. It's like, what is this thing on? It's like, what is Devil Goblins? I'm obsessed with this. It's not that interesting. I did Devil Goblins. Thank you all very much for coming, especially at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm very sorry about that.